There are three main ascending pathways that are sending information upstairs, right? Sensory information up to the brain. And this is the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway, shown in purple. The anterior lateral pathways carry somatosensory information. This includes the spinothalamic pathway. And then the spinocerebellar pathway, which carries specific proprioceptive information from muscles and tendons to the cerebellum. And these fibers on this pathway uniquely don't cross if they're ipsilateral. The somatosensory pathways carry information about touch, pain, temperature, and proprioception, and they consist of three neurons in a chain, except for the spinocerebellar. That one's going to be different. So really, our DCML and our anterior lateral or spinothalamic pathways. There are first order neurons. These are neurons that are carrying information from sensory receptors to the spinal cord. So we can see sensory receptor moving information up to the spinal cord. That's a first order neuron. Most cell bodies are located in the dorsal root ganglia. Our second order neurons are carrying information from either the spinal cord or the brainstem to the thalamus up here. And these cell bodies are located either in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord or in the brainstem in the medulla oblongata, typically. And then we have our third order neurons that carry information from the thalamus to the cortex themselves. And their cell bodies are located in the thalamus. A first order neuron, then, by definition, is going to conduct an impulse from cutaneous receptors and proprioceptors, and it's going to then branch diffusely as it enters into the spinal cord or the medulla, and it's going to specifically synapse with a second order neuron. The second order neuron is an inner neuron because it's a communicator, it's a messenger. And its cell body is in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, or it could be located in the medullary nuclei, in the nuclei in the medulla. And these axons are going to send all the way up to the thalamus, or in some instances, the cerebellum. And then a third order neuron, these are also inner neurons because they're carrying information from other neurons, and their cell bodies are located in the thalamus and they extend to the somatosensory cortex. There are no third order neurons that are located in the cerebellum. These are only located upstairs in the brain. So our three somatosensory pathways, we have two that are similar and one that's different. The dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway, which is going to send information to the sensory cortex via the thalamus. The spinothalamic pathway, which is an anterior lateral pathway. This sends information to the sensory cortex via the thalamus as well, specifically things like discriminatory touch and proprioception that we're conscious of, and our spinocerebellar tracts, which end in the cerebellum and do not have a third order neuron. So we could follow these tracks up. So the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway starts in the extremity, either lower extremity or upper extremity. So this receptor will sense, these receptors will sense some sort of sensation. They send that as an action potential along their axon, along their peripheral nerve, which enters into the spinal cord as a spinal nerve, moves through the dorsal root ganglia where their neuron cell body is located, and then moves via the dorsal root into the dorsal horn of the spinal cord in the gray matter. Now, in the DCML pathway, this could synapse here. This could synapse in actually the area of entry in the spinal cord, or it can travel upward via the fasciculus cunatus if it's an upper extremity initial location, or the fasciculus gracilis if it's a lower extremity location. So it travels up via these long axons, and it's going to synapse then in the medulla oblongata, either via the nucleus gracilis, if it traveled up via the fasciculus gracilis from the lower extremity, or the nucleus cunatus, if it traveled up the fasciculus cunatus from the upper extremity. From there, the first order neuron stops, and we see the starting little cell body of our second order neuron, that at the medulla oblongata is going to decussate, cross over from one side to the other. That's that contralateral innervation. And it's going to move up via medial lemniscal or lemniscus pathways. Hence, dorsal column, moving up in the dorsal column first, then traveling over and moving up via the medial lemniscal pathway, where it moves all the way up into the thalamus, and that second order neuron synapses with a third order neuron in the thalamus, and that third order neuron is going to then go straight to the cerebral cortex, to the primary somatosensory cortex, where it will synapse at its homunculi, depending on the structure that initially stimulated it. And this is our DCML pathway. Now, our spinothalamic pathway or anterior lateral pathway, we have some sort of sensory receptor, temperature, pain, oftentimes that senses some sensation. Via our first order neuron, it sends information up its axon. It goes through the spinal nerve, passes through the dorsal root ganglia, passes through the dorsal root. And then we'll see these first order neurons are going to synapse at the spinal cord place of entry. In the dorsal horn. And so now we have our second order neuron at that location of entry. The spinal cord will cross over, it'll decussate, and then it'll travel up as a lateral spinothalamic tract because it's in the lateral region, moving from the spinal cord to the thalamus. And this second order neuron is going to move all the way up and it's going to synapse in the thalamus. And then that third order neuron is going to move out and it's going to innervate at the location on the primary somatosensory cortex that was initially stimulated. And here as your spinothalamic pathways. Here's your summary. The spinocerebellar pathway is the unique one. Spinocerebellar pathway is going to start with our muscle spindle, our proprioceptors. This is our first order neuron. It's going to send that information via an axon through the spinal nerve, pass through its neuron cell body in the dorsal root ganglia, pass through the dorsal root, and synapse with its second order neuron at the level of entry in the dorsal horn. That second order neuron is going to travel up via a dorsal spinocerebellar tract. The second order neuron then will move up into the cerebellum and it will synapse on the surface of the cerebellum on the same side it started. It didn't cross over, ipsilateral, telling the cerebellum kind of what it needs to do to maintain our appropriate posture against gravity and space. And here is your spinocerebellar pathways.